TopMedTalk.
There's a reason why every 9-year-old in the country can name 50 Pokemon characters. You're welcome. It's because video games are exceedingly good at education as an indirect consequence of play.
Well, hello and welcome to TopMedTalk. We are back for EbPom USA live from Chicago. I'm Desiree Chappell, your host, and joining me from the UK is Monty Mythen, our editor-in-chief. Monty, how are you?
I'm good, Desiree. We always tend to start talking about the weather for some reason.
Well, you're British, so we have to talk about the weather.
We've got plenty to talk about at the moment. It's only one of the things that we can talk about. But it's just starting to chill off here at the moment. So
and it looks like you're in London. Is that right?
I've actually moved because we're doing the virtual show and we're getting back into a bit of lockdown here and the social distancing is happening. I've relocated with 2 or 3 members of the team up to our broadcasting centre, which is actually in the heart of the UK in a place called Melton Mowbray, Mowbray, which is very famous for pork pies.
Yes.
Now, I shared with you some images of pork pies yesterday. What is the US translation of a pork pie? I mean, the Hunters, it's near...
A meat cake. I don't know.
It's near where Robin Hood came from, not far from here, and the Hunters used to have it. It's a pastry case with meat in it, and it's very famous for that and our broadcast center. So
you guys had to locate up there because we are doing our virtual EbPom Chicago meeting. So when you said you wish you were in London, I wish you were in Chicago. I wish I was in Chicago. So Monty, tell us a little bit about EbPom for those listeners who may not have heard about.
So evidence-based perioperative medicine, it's a bit of a mouthful, and EbPom is a ridiculous abbreviation. But it's lingered for over 20 years. So we were one of the first perioperative medicine meetings in the world and developed a global presence. Then COVID-19 disrupted our iconic London meeting this year, so we went virtual. We've been prepared for it for quite a long time. And more than 8,000 people turned up and joined in, which was great. And now our cumulative registrants because now we're going to Chicago, and then after that we're going to our Ireland meeting. We're up over 12,000, which is great.
Fantastic. Some of the topics this year, Monty, for EbPom Chicago, some hot topics you just recorded this morning.
Well, I think anemia has just gone to number one because if you haven't seen the results of the largest ever prospective randomized controlled trial of the preoperative treatment of anemia, has got people pretty agitated, excited.
Yeah.
So
be sure to check it out. You can still sign up for EbPom.
It's published in the Lancet, and I just recorded a great interview with Professor Toby Richards, who's the lead PI, who's currently in Australia.
Yeah, that's going to be great. Looking forward to that. We have some great lectures on patient safety, on all things enhanced recovery, neuromuscular blockade, perioperative medicine models, all a broad range of topics. One of the sessions that we're doing, we're going to be talking about video laryngoscopy, which we did at our last meeting. We had a TopMed talk about that because of COVID, using that a lot more in practice in anesthesia and critical care. For sure. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about, another great topic here on TopMedTalk, is something that is not a subject that we're going to cover at the meeting, but we thought would be really cool to bring into EbPom, is the gamification of medicine. Monty, I know a lot of people are probably like, what does that even mean? I didn't even really understand exactly how we would gamify medicine.
Well, I mean, there's been some tradition of that. So some of our greatest teachers have brought the education to life in a more adaptive way by making it more fun and more gamified. Yeah. So, I mean, I was involved in a project, for example, where in educating about oxygen flux, we used 3-dimensional images of trains and train sets to explain the distribution of oxygen around the body. And it all sounded very, very basic and a bit childish, but when it was subjected to, which is the most effective way of teaching medical students physiology, the results were much better if we gamified it. Now that's the sort of pre-digital gamification. That was, tabletop, train sets, video cameras, back in the day.
It's like the Atari. It's like the Atari of
exactly. That's all written up and that's published.
Yeah.
And then more recently, we get this with our kids. I've got 4 grown-up children now. As they play video games, is that good for them? Is that bad for them?
Yeah.
The games that were very much problem solving, moving through different dimensions, I think helped some of my children enormously to improve some of their skill sets. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Well, absolutely. And we've talked a lot about simulation, utilizing that in education for healthcare providers and kind of working that all in together. Well, here with us, we're so excited to be able to talk to the CEO of LevelX. We have Sam Glassenberg joining us from Chicago. Sam, how are you doing?
Doing great.
Good. Thank you so much for joining us and taking the time out of what I'm sure is your super busy schedule, because with 2020, I'm sure that the digital revolution is going crazy and keeping you very busy.
We are keeping very busy. There's, how do we say this? There are many trends that we've been observing in the healthcare, ecosystem, trends toward, virtual training, digital training, and so forth. Those trends have been asymptotically accelerated recently. And, not to mention this, incredible demand for content around, how to train doctors for COVID scenarios and other things.
Tell us a little bit about LevelX and about yourself.
Sure. So my background actually isn't originally in healthcare. So my background is in the video games industry. I started out at LucasArts making Star Wars games. I used to fly spaceships for a living. Spent many years at Microsoft managing a game technology team. My last company did video games for all the major Hollywood films like Hunger Games and Mission Impossible. This whole games industry thing has made me a little bit of the disgrace of the family because I come from a long line of doctors. My grandfather was a famous physician. My parents, both, my wife, everyone's doctors, and I'm the guy who went into video games. So back in 2012, my father, he's an anesthesiologist here in Chicago, Northwestern. He goes, all right, Sam, clearly it's too late. You're not going to med school. So at least put all this video game stuff to good use. Make me a game to train my colleagues to do a fiber optic intubation. It's a very visual procedure. It's tricky to learn. And I don't want to drag anybody to a sim center. Can you just make me a game that they can play on their iPhones? So literally out of guilt, I sat down for 3 weekends and threw together a game for him that I uploaded to the App Store. And I did that simply because I was busy running a game company. So I didn't have time to install it on his friends' phones one by one. So now there's a link. You can download it. Leave me alone. 2 years later in 2014, he calls me. He goes, oh, Sam, how many people downloaded it? I have no idea, but I will check for you.
I haven't looked.
I went and I looked. We had 100,000 doctors, nurses, airway specialists worldwide who've been playing this thing. At which point I Google it and I discover, unbeknownst to me, they've been doing efficacy studies on this crappy little game that shows it's improving performance at institutions around the world. And so that was the motivation for starting LevelX. What if we actually took the top game designers and developers in the industry? We're talking the executive producer of Mortal Kombat, the creative director of Call of Duty, the marketing director of Words with Friends, put them with top physicians across multiple specialties to capture the challenges of the practice of medicine using video game mechanics. So how do we use game technology, but more importantly, the neuroscience of game design to help accelerate the adoption curve of new techniques and approaches and technologies in healthcare and help physicians and other medical professionals improve their skills?
Oh, that's fantastic. What a cool story. I mean, usually it's something like that, right? That you're doing a favor for your dad, whatever.
I find it usually, yes, it's rare that companies sort of emerge out of, guilt.
So I just want to ask you, Sam. So Sam, I've used your app, your fiber optic intubation app. The patient coughs if you go to the wrong place and they seem to get a stress response, etc. But is there a handheld additional component to it? Is that in the pipeline so I could do this as well, if you see what I mean?
So yes.
It was brilliant, but it was that on the screen.
Right, so we actually have, as well. So I can demo if you want for you some examples.
Yeah, that'd be great, yeah.
That we've done that actually use the position of the device.
Yeah.
Before I do that, though, it's very important to understand what we're trying to achieve here, right? We're not trying to replace a mannequin. If you want to understand, right, how to do the basic maneuvers of the device, right, a mannequin is good for that. What the mannequin can't do is recreate the 100 rare, challenging, difficult cases that you might encounter once in your career. That's where this comes in, right? We're trying to, what do we call optimize cognitive load, right? When you're learning how to, when a fighter pilot is learning how to fly a fighter plane, they don't learn what the dials mean in the same lesson where they learn the advanced maneuvers, right? Yeah. You separate those things. And so what we're able to do using the touch screen, we're not going to necessarily teach you exactly how to hold the device in your hand. That's okay. You use the actual device for that. What we can do is we can capture the hundreds of difficult, challenging cases so you can move your decision-making skills, your visualization skills, understand the physics, the mental models, like what you described with the train, right? You can develop an internal understanding of these things without having to learn it through practice on live patients, right? This doesn't replace the mannequin. What this does replace is the 500 live patients you need to train on in order to encounter those 5 to 10 rare scenarios, because we can recreate the rare and the difficult, and then we can help you train your visualization skills, your recognition skills, your deductive reasoning skills on those cases.
Yeah. And it was interesting when I was doing kind of background and looking at, the reviews and some of these things, that was kind of what was coming up is that, I'm able to see these different scenarios that I may not see, in practice all the time, but, it really shows me, the pathophysiology of the anatomy and all those different things, which I thought was really cool. So I'm so glad that you're bringing this up, because I told Monty, I said, we have to show it on a screen share, because this is super, super cool. So this is showing us, this is the app, the Level X app. And you have 3 or 4 different specialties right now on the app, right?
Right. So we are live in 4 different specialties. Okay. So we have now 700,000 medical professionals playing our games. We have 4 apps in the App Store. They're available for free. You can go download them. In anesthesia, Airway X. There's also cardiology, Cardio X, pulmonology, Pulmex, and gastroenterology, Gastro X. So happy to put a colonoscopy up here if you'd like.
Okay.
And all of these are capturing, they're filled with dozens of rare cases that have been submitted by doctors around the country. We're not introducing you to how to do a fiber optic intubation. We are going to present dozens of rare, difficult, challenging, once-in-a-lifetime cases.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Tracheal papillomas, follicular cysts. Do they play these games?
Exactly. So here, we have all sorts of different scenarios. So you can actually, so we have these scenarios where you can actually play and do an intubation. Let's find a good example here just to show. Here, large obstructing tumor. This is a scenario where they went and they anesthetized a patient. Here you can see you're in full control of the device. I'm just controlling this here on my phone. This app is actually 4 years old, so we have some newer technology I can showcase, but here you see a giant tumor.
Not supposed to be there. If you're not an anesthesia provider, that is not supposed to be there.
Right, no, that is not supposed to be there. In fact, the anesthesiologist who encountered this, literally spend multiple attempts to try to get around the tumor and find the right entry point. Until eventually he realized that when the patient breathed, bubbles formed in the corner of the tumor, and he realized that was his entry point, because that's where the tumor wasn't attached to the tissue. And we have lots of other here. So, for example, we launched this a few months ago. So when COVID hit, immediately what we discovered was the guidelines for how to manage an airway were very different for COVID patients. If you take the traditional approaches, right, you could aerosolize the virus, you could cause damage to the airway on a compromised COVID airway. And so we started out, the first guidelines that we actually found from the Italian medical society, anesthesia societies in Italian, we implemented those, and then we proceeded to build a sequence of, and then as the guidelines came out from ASA and CDC, we updated it. And so literally what happens is you go through a sequence of patient cases where this first patient doesn't have COVID, but basically what you have to do is play through the guidelines, right? So we're not going to ask you to memorize a flow chart. What we're going to do is present you a sequence of patients. It's a strategy game. You have to make the right decisions in the right order. And then we'll let you make the wrong decisions and deal with the consequences. And then at the end, we'll show you what the outcome was relative to the recommendations. So you really can, it's like what Monty was describing, you can really develop a mental model of what is going on. Learn the things you would otherwise only learn by practicing on dozens of patients.
Well, Sam, that brings up a great point, because this is fantastic for us as providers who have been doing this for a little while. I was looking at the COVID thing. What a great resource to have. But here to talk to us a little bit more about maybe utilizing this in academics is our next guest, Bob Thiele, who's an anesthesiologist from the University of Virginia, into the conversation. Hi, Bob. How are you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. Yeah, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Monty. Nice to meet you, Sam.
Yeah. So, Bob, you were telling us you're an anesthesiologist there at UVA, you're assistant professor. Tell us just a little bit more about yourself.
My original training was in chemical engineering, and I then ended up going to medical school. And a lot of the research that I do is based on sort of the intersection of engineering and medicine. And one of the sort of parts of that is trying to better use technology to educate really our residents and our trainees. And so I started with that when I was a resident. We were a big fan of Wikipedia just in general, and realized, why isn't there like a medical Wikipedia? And so worked with program director at the time, Ed Nemmergut, and the IRS to create Open Anesthesia, which was like Wikipedia for anesthesia and critical care. And that led to a spinoff that Dr. Nemmergut directs, which is Anesthesia Self-Study Plus, which is sort of an adaptive learning algorithm to help train health officers, get them ready for their board certification. The other thing I did was, when Apple came out with the iPad, I realized that you could start embedding videos into books, basically, which you could never do. You know, you read all the textbooks on echocardiography, and then you're trying to take some three-dimensional thing and make it onto a printed page, which is impossible. And so with the iPad platform, I was able to create an iBook where you could teach echo and actually watch while you're reading videos of 2- and 3-dimensional echocardiography.
Wow, that's awesome. I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about utilizing this gamification of medicine and these different, techniques and video laryngoscopy and all those different things, utilizing that for education of our up and coming healthcare providers, physicians, nurses, and if you can see an application for it there.
For starters, to emphasize what Sam said, I think just taking the difficult airway algorithm as an example, when people first think about difficult airways, they think that this is a technical skill. And you obviously have to have some familiarity with the devices that you're using. But really, I tell people it's a cognitive skill. It's a decision-making algorithm. And Desiree, having done this, that you do get to a point where there's no return. And you have like 3 minutes to do this successfully. And so your algorithm and your decision-making is absolutely crucial. Good planning is crucial. And then taking in data and making the right decision is useful. And that's what this application does and can do for people, is present you with sort of multiple forks in the road, and you have to make the right decision every time. And that's not possible to do it's not ethical to do on a human, and it's not possible to do on a mannequin.
Sam, one of the things that I wanted to touch on is with the TIVA challenge, because I played through that as well. And I'm like, I kind of get it. And once I started playing, I thought this would be really useful for someone who was just starting out doing a lot of TIVAs, because there's definitely a finesse to the whole thing. Walk us through a little bit of that.
Just as Bob mentioned, so we're capturing the challenges of medicine as video game mechanics. So many of those challenges are cognitive. And as Bob mentioned, like sometimes, like you said, you only have 3 minutes, right? You have a limited amount of time. Another challenge is you may be dealing with multiple patients simultaneously, right? Especially in anesthesia. And there, it's not just a challenge of time, but a challenge of memories. You're constantly context switching between different ORs. And so what we wanted to do is capture that challenge and demonstrate the benefits of using different tools like bispectral index monitoring to help you in that process. And so what we do is we have this sequence for TIVA where we actually have there's 2 levels. The first one, you have 6 patients. The second one, you have 8. And they start coming in. They're all in for spinal procedures. They all have different characteristics. And you need to properly dose the patient. And so here, I can look at my patient's weight and other considerations, frailty and the procedure they're undergoing. And I can choose a bolus. And then what I can do is I can monitor the patient over time. So here we'll pick an infusion rate. We'll put a maintenance rate of maybe 125. And so here's patient 2. This patient's heavier, so we'll go for a 2.5 bolus. And so what starts to happen is as more patients come up, and then now things start, this is what we call in the games industry a time management game, right? There are games like Diner Dash that follow this mechanic, where it gets harder and harder and harder. The challenge isn't managing one patient, it's managing many at a time.
And I could see a huge application for this in our CRNA students and med students is that, we learn all the textbook answers. And so that's what I was like, okay, I'm just going to blow through this. I just do textbook answers like, oh, well, that guy, that guy's waking up, that guy's hypotensive. And so I thought, and then it kind of made me think, and I was like, this would be fantastic for students because then you have to actually think about who you're taking care of. So I thought that was really cool.
Right. It's actually, I'm just realizing that having a conversation while playing this game is too difficult. So I failed to try to manage all of it at once. But that's exactly the point, right? And so certain patients, right, if you just follow standard dosing, right, patients might actually go very deeper in anesthesia than you would want. It would take longer to wake them up. Or, instead of just monitoring heart rate and breathing and things like that, there are other approaches that you can take, like BIS, for example, to identify when it's time, when a patient might be becoming too alert. And so these are, this is just an example of being able to go and play through this with different tools and ultimately, develop a sense for, and a mental model, just like Monty was describing with the trains, like a mental model for how this works.
Sam, can I ask two quick questions? One is that people can always see risk in things. They can see the cloud, the spectre of litigation in some way that you encouraged people to play in a particular way and then brought that to a patient and hurt them. I don't see those risks, if you see what I mean. But how do you handle that? I noticed there were some disclaimers at the front. And the second one is I notice in some places you've got a badge that says CME, and people are very CME hungry at the moment, understandably, because they've had their wings clipped.
Right. So ultimately, it's like the same as any educational material, right? If this is not limited to video games. If you create written material or video material that is inaccurate, right, that can be problematic. And so that's why we follow the same process that you would for any other published work. So what we're doing is everything that goes into the app has been peer reviewed. So we have at Level X over 100 physician advisors plus hundreds more contributors that are giving us feedback, that are reviewing the material, that are playing the game long before it ever goes out into the public. And for CME content, there's even an additional level of scrutiny and review that's undergone. And we update. The advantage of being on mobile is we update the content constantly. So as guidelines, for example, were updated for COVID, the next week we were able to do an update to the cases to reflect the new guidelines. And so it's in that way, it's even sort of advantageous over a book because it's more straightforward to update. And so even just for that example that we showed with TIVA, the initial design, before we even started the design, we consulted with a group of anesthesiologists. Then we did the design, we reviewed the design with anesthesiologists. Then we ran through multiple iterations of play tests to make sure not only is the pharmacokinetic model accurate, but does it feel right? Right? Does this feel like a patient's response to anesthesia given their age, their weight, the procedure, the length of the procedure, and so on? And so all of this sort of goes together to create something that is going to be accurate. And then we're constantly getting feedback from doctors, right? So as they play it in the field, they may give us advice, feedback, guidance, new cases, and we just continue to update it.
Yeah. And the free CME bit, Sam, and I'll be quiet now, I can go in there and I can hit the free CME button, and if I play well and play nice, I can walk away with a CME point.
Yeah, certain content, not all the content is available for CME. So for example, the TIVA example is not, you don't earn CME for it, you just, it's great for developing skill. About 25% of the content in the game is specifically, for playing it, you can earn CME credit. And then the rest of it is there because it's interesting and challenging.
Thank you.
So you can decide. We have some doctors that love to play for CME. Other doctors, get their CME elsewhere, and they, play this game to develop skills and, explore interesting cases. The same reason you might open a medical journal every month. So it's not that doctors don't want to learn these techniques. It's that the tools have not been given to them to enable them to learn and develop that mental model and practice without doing it on live patients. And so that creates a barrier. And what we're doing here is we're just using the technology and the neuroscience of game design to break down that barrier and help us, and help develop cognitive models, develop mental models for how these complex systems work and how patients respond to different interventions.
Yeah. Well, Bob, I wanted to take it back to you. We've talked about some of the applications, but where do you see the adoption of this really into not necessarily just academics, because I think sometimes they're a little bit ahead of the curve on this, especially with millennials coming through. This is their life, that they've been living. So maybe address that first, but then as providers.
This just reminds me a lot of the Mocha Minute we do right now. So for the ABA, the way that we sort of maintain our certification has changed dramatically over the last few years. And now, like every quarter, I have to answer 90 questions or something like that online. And they're supposed to be updated to make them evidence-based. So the idea is that you'll do a few every other day or something like that. And that's a big improvement than taking a test every 10 years, right? But it's still like 1990s internet technology. There's no
antiquated
algorithm. There's no decision tree. It's like a paragraph and what's the best answer. And real life is not about a paragraph and a one best answer. It's the stuff that we're talking about, the decision tree and thinking on the fly with a limited amount of time. And so I can see this, either this product or something like it, working its way into sort of maintenance of board certification for anesthesia and all the cognitive specialties. I mean, I think it's a really, really powerful tool. Having played with it, I think it's really high potential and it's fun, and that's important. You have to like it. I think what needs to happen for widespread adoptions is got to be comprehensive. If you ask your residents or SRNAs to read a book, it's a comprehensive book. It's hard everybody's maxed out, like they have so much bandwidth, cognitive bandwidth, it's tough to ask somebody to do something, to adopt a technology that doesn't cover all their needs. So as something like this develops and there's more content on there, and you get to the point where you can say this will cover like pretty much everything, then I think it's exponentially more useful. And which makes me wonder, and a question for Sam really is it possible, really, would it be possible for people at teaching hospitals or wherever to actually sort of upload their own cases? I mean, not everybody would be able to do that, but I could envision people who are really interested in this saying, I don't know what providing sort of the structure of the flow chart, the images, the text, what needs to happen. And just like people submit case reports now in the journal, you could submit sort of a decision tree or a thing that happened, and it would be real. And you could actually have very quickly grow sort of like a library of challenging, difficult things that actually occurred, and that could be incredibly valuable.
So that's
possible.
So that is in fact the design point. So all the cases that we showed here, the intubation cases, the COVID cases, these are all real cases that were submitted. So the way Level X works is doctors are submitting cases to us all the time. And just like you would do a medical journal, right? You encounter an interesting case in the OR, you submit it. And what we do is we take it and we analyze it. And then our artists, if it meets a bar, what we'll do is our artists will actually recreate the case based on video, based on photos, based on the account of the physician, whether it's in cardiology, gastroenterology, anesthesia. They'll recreate the case. They'll then send it just to the doctor who submitted it to review it, make sure it's accurate. Oh, wait, that should bleed more. That, should have been more swollen. Then they'll tweak it until the doctor says, yes, that's accurate. And then we'll peer review it and then send it out in the next app update. So what you see is like when we launch these games, we usually launch with around maybe a dozen cases. And over time, we continue to evolve. I think Airway by now has, well over 50 or 60 that we keep adding to. And I think that, to talk to your prior point, I think there is a place where video games provide tremendous advantage. If there are things that you can learn well from watching a video or reading a paper, right? There are a lot of things that you can learn well that way. And those are the things that are well suited for those mediums because it's much faster and easier to produce a paper or to create it. Where this helps are the scenarios where it just doesn't cut it, right? The scenarios where you need to develop that mental model. And that's really where we work with, forward-thinking anesthesiologists and other specialists to really understand what are those things. What are the things that, a video or an animation or even a textbook, just you're not going to get it until you've practiced on 50 patients.
Right.
Those are the things that we're looking for. And then we really want to drill down onto what are the very specific skills that you need, that you're missing, and then how do we build a game to help you develop that mental model. I think the example that Monty used of trains is actually very poignant, right? Because there's a complex system going on there, and the book just doesn't explain it. But using trains, right, you can take a familiar analogy and then help yourself develop a mental model of what's going on. And as you described, studies were then done that showed that was a more effective modality of learning. Games just enable us to create, the train game, so to speak, create hundreds of those for different subjects and then deploy them immediately. We don't need to mail everybody a train set. They can update an app on their phone.
Yeah.
To me, what would be really exciting was, I'm a assistant editor at Anesthesia and Analgesia, and they spun off a journal called A&A Practice, which was first A&A case reports. And what would be interesting is if people and most of A&A practice are still case reports, challenging, difficult things. It would be interesting if, I don't know if you've reached out to them, but where people who actually get case reports accepted could then automatically send that to you.
That would be great. I mean,
so they're not all going to make it. They're not all going to be ideal for you. But then when it gets printed and people share it, you could read this case report, and then at the end there's a QR code that's like, hey, if you want to actually try this thing out now that you've read it and see if you can do it in 90 seconds, here you go.
Yeah.
That would be great. I mean,
it'd be kind of a merger of the academic world and what you're doing. It might get you a lot, introduce the product to a lot more people.
Yeah, and I think as you described, that's how you get to that comprehensive view, right? You want to be able to just have easy access to be able to link between the written content and then the interactive content for where you need it. And so we found, we have at this point over half the medical students in the country have at least one Level X app on their phone. Yeah. And they're, they play through the content. It's obviously not providing them, a medical education. What it's doing is it's providing, some sort of key areas of skill development.
The last questions that I have for you, Sam, and Bob, you can maybe speak to this too, is that there's a lot for physicians here, so medical education, but I'm a nurse at my core, and really, now in nursing education, we don't have enough nurses. We're trying to get them through as quickly as possible, and there are a lot of skills in a bachelor prepared nurse that you don't get right now because you're so much into learning about community health and all these different, large concepts that when it comes to practical skills, you don't necessarily have those coming out. So have you looked at expanding into other healthcare fields?
Well, so for us, our games are played, said 700,000 healthcare professionals. That includes doctors, that includes nurses, that includes residents, fellows, and so on. And so our primary audience is physicians. But what we often find is that the knowledge that they need is relevant to broader audiences, including the teams that are supporting them. So, for example, we were talking about video laryngoscopy. Maybe I'll pull up a demo here. So here, for example, this was played by thousands of anesthesiologists, but also an even larger audience of nurses. We talked about, understanding some of the mechanics. This is a level that's played in our Airway X game where I can literally, excuse my office is a bit of a mess, but I can literally place a virtual patient here on my desk and practice using different devices. So I can practice direct laryngoscopy as well as we start with direct and then you expand into video laryngoscopy. And you can just do this, I can place the patient on the floor to recreate an emergency scenario. I can place them on my desk. You notice he actually casts a shadow on my desk. But again, it's a challenging patient. So this is a normal presenting patient. He's not morbidly obese. He can open his jaw all the way, but his vocal cord just a little anterior. So in order to visualize him, I need to strike the rugby pose. Let's get this awkward position in order to get a proper visual on the cords, because if I stand up, right, I'm not able to insert my endotracheal tube. And so here we're able to use the camera on the phone, the augmented reality capabilities, to track your position relative to the virtual patient, right? And then I can practice doing this using different devices. So here, for example, I can try direct, and then I can try with video, right? So I can see, for example, in a COVID scenario, I have a beautiful view of the cords from any angle, and I can do it, at a distance from the patient's mouth. So here I can see I don't have to hold the mouth nearly as wide open. I have a beautiful view of the vocal cords from from a safe distance.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, that is fantastic. Monty, any other questions for Sam or Bob?
Well, you can see the chords from London. How much further away do you need to? That's how many thousands of miles is that? Anyway, there we go. The old ones are the best. That's brilliant. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Well done, Dad.
Yeah. He knew he was going to be able to pull you in somehow. Yeah,
One
Bob.
is, are you going to be developing like a leaderboard, kind of like Peloton and Swift have? Or you like, I'm like the world's top 5 anesthesiologist. Is that coming? Or I might be bottom 5.
Yes. We're going to be doing, I think actually Airway might have some leaderboards for some of the content. We do leaderboards. I think there's also, we're going to have the opportunity to compete against your colleagues, against other folks at your institution. So all this is rolling out. Over time.
Bob, what's your handle going to be on that leaderboard?
Oh man, at Stoic Anesthesiologist.
Oh. There you go.
Yeah. As in Marcus Aurelius. My last question is: my kids went back to virtual school this week. They're all elementary school, and I've been following along and getting videos and texts from my wife. When is Level X going to take over the elementary school education world? Because I need that to happen like yesterday.
I second that motion.
Yeah, we say
just hit the pause button on anesthesia and get into elementary school.
We say there's a reason why every 9-year-old in the country can name 50 Pokemon characters. You're welcome. It's because video games are exceedingly good at education as an indirect consequence of play. Yeah. When you use the neuroscience of games to do this, you can actually. It's far more effective at education. There's a game called Dragon Box, which I would recommend.
Okay.
It does what Level X is doing in healthcare. They do it in math. So it's a game. It's a puzzle game. You have these little monsters, and you're trying to balance the puzzle, get the monsters on 2 different sides, and you're playing this game with monsters, and it's a lot of fun, and it's this cool puzzle. And only around level 19 do you realize, wait a minute, this game is teaching me how to balance algebraic equations. And that's the magic, right? That's the moment when you're playing with the trains and you go, oh, wait a minute, this isn't about trains. This is teaching me about oxygen transport, right? That's the opportunity. If you can present these things as a puzzle, right, or as an intuitive model, it's far more effective than just, here's rule 1 about how you balance an algebraic equation. Here's rule 2. If you think about it that way, you can't learn it. If you turn it into a puzzle game, which is what it really is, it becomes you can absorb that much faster, and you develop a much better understanding of what's actually going on.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out. It was fun to do a deep dive on this, and looking forward to seeing where we go in the future. Definitely check out the COVID part of this. That's going to be very useful. I'm sure probably coming up in the fall, as we potentially may see more COVID, so that'll be useful there. And Sam,
and the TIVA content that just launched.
I was saying the TIVA content that just launched for with enhanced recovery, and some of the things that we're going to be talking about actually during EBPOM meeting, utilizing TIVA in enhanced recovery protocols and some of the things like that. It's going to be very useful. Lastly, I just wanted to say that it's going to be great. Hopefully we can talk to you soon, but I remember what I was going to say. Please, for our listeners, where do we find the information for this, Sam?
Oh, it's easy. Just go to the App Store and search for Airway X, Airway space EX. It should show up as the right at the top of the search. Just download it, install it, and start to play. And here I can just show everybody where it is.
And it's all on our iPhone and iPad, Android, right? So
iPhone, iPad, Android. Just go and download it from your favorite app store. Open up the app, and then you'll see right here in bright colors the TIVA unit. And you can just open that up and start playing and trying your hand at managing 6, 8 simultaneous patients.
It's fun. Don't choose the textbook answer. I'm just going to tell you that. All right. Well, like I said, thank you guys so much. And hopefully we'll be able to catch up with you soon. Please be sure to check us out at TopMedTalk.com for other fascinating conversations in the world of perioperative medicine. You can find us on all your favorite social media platforms, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. We are there. And hopefully you are enjoying EBPOM USA live from Chicago or wherever you are in the world. So, Monty, any parting words?
Well, if you missed EBPOM live from Chicago, it's not long until EBPOM Ireland comes to you from Dingle on the beautiful west coast of Ireland. And we've got some fantastic sessions there. And you can watch it at any time zone, anywhere around the world. So come and join in.
Yeah. Now that's one place that I really, really am sad that we don't get to go to. But next year, 2021, looking forward to it. Gentlemen, thank you again. Have a fabulous day. And everyone stay safe out there. Cheers.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Thank you.
TopMedTalk. Thanks for downloading TopMedTalk. Don't forget to subscribe via your podcatcher. Don't forget to check us out on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And also, don't forget, TopMedTalk is the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, evidence-based perioperative medicine. We'd love you to find out more about that. If you check out ebpom.org, you can find low prices on some of the conferences we're organising around the world. Many of them are virtual and don't even involve you leaving your own home. Check out ebpom.org now.